whole bunch to get to. There's lots going on. Let's get into it. First, the two big stories really are the fraud that's going on with the $1 billion slush fund, the whistleblower here that's talking about the fraud that's ongoing, and we're going to listen to that to get started. And there's a whole bunch more fraud. The Medicago and Decluse riding in Quebec got a whole bunch of millions of dollars, but didn't get anything in return. So we're spending a lot of money and there's a lot of waste, and we've got whistleblowers and still nothing happens. But I mean, that's what's going on in Canada. We have to understand that this Liberal government has consequences. Those consequences are mismanagement of our dollars. Here's somebody who works in government who's blowing the whistle on this, trying to say, we've been trying to fix this problem. It's egregious. It's incredible. It's unbelievable. Here's Michael Barrett. He says, explosive testimony. Whistleblower from Trudeau's $1 billion green slush fund testifies $150 million in taxpayer money misappropriated, habitual conflicts of interest violations by Liberal appointed board members, coordinated effort by governments to cover up. Watch. And yeah, it's incredible. We're going to watch the first 2 minutes probably, and maybe a little bit more, but here we go.
The SCTC board executive...
Oh, that's too fast. It's too fast. We'll try this. We'll start over as well, I think, because it's interesting.
The SCTC board executives and senior management must be held accountable for their gross mismanagement of taxpayer money and the gross misconduct that's been perpetrated by the toxic senior management team that has victimized countless employees. And the federal government must also be held accountable for its embarrassing lack of oversight that's allowed these problems to persist and its egregious cover-up of the truth that occurred this fall. At the beginning of this year, a comprehensive 345-page presentation was created and submitted to the Privy Council office at the request of the Office of the Auditor General of Canada, who we originally went to. This package contained documents that outline gross mismanagement across every aspect of SDTC's operations and governance. It highlighted non-compliance with the SDTC Act and Contribution Agreement across all of the organization's funding streams and serious breaches of the conflict of interest policies by the executives and board. The package also included evidence of the toxic workplace culture that was created by CEO Leah Lawrence and her friend and still current VP Zoe Kolbuck, who've been allowed to continue abusing and harassing employees by a passive senior management team and board that protects and hides the abuse. All of this information underwent review by PCO and was then forwarded to ISED, who subsequently engaged RCGT to conduct an independent fact-finding exercise to validate this information. Here are the findings for everyone. The Seed Fund, Ecosystem Fund, and Scale Up Fund were all found to be ineligible due to multiple violations of the contribution agreement, significant deviations from the due diligence process, and conflict of interest breaches by board members and executives. This finding encompasses nearly 200 companies that all received over $80 million, all of which was improperly funded using taxpayer money. The two COVID payments in 2020 and 2021 were also given to the full portfolio of companies and totaled almost $40 million, and were also deemed to be ineligible as the use of these funds was not effectively tracked. And several board members in that instance also violated conflict of interest by approving almost $4 million to themselves to over a dozen companies where they all hold significant ownership or executive positions. The report also revealed that SDTC lacked HR processes or policies, and issues were never even reported to the board. And conveniently, the RCGT investigators couldn't even find a single record of any complaint ever being made in the history of the organization. This is a staggering level of incompetence, willful ignorance, and corruption that has resulted in SDTC improperly distributing almost $150 million in taxpayer dollars just in the past few years and abusing dozens of people that have only tried to talk about the truth.
We'll leave it there. There's still a couple of minutes left in this testimony, and it's explosive. That's 3 minutes, and he's saying $150 million, rampant corruption, incompetence at SDTC Canada, that's Sustainable Development Technology Canada. It's the same as the Arrive scam app, and I'm sure there's more. This is the tip of the iceberg. And even $11 million for the Arrive Can people to do nothing but administer the app and quarterback the development. That's a lot of money. That's more than, $16 orange juice, I think. So people are upset. And the whistleblowers who were trying to get this out, and I've told this story before. I've read it and reported on it before, but it's interesting to hear it right from the whistleblower's mouth. But they've been trying to get this out, and they were bounced from different agency to different agency. And he had all sorts of acronyms, the FTC, the IBC, ABC, whatever it is. I used BC a lot there. But fundamentally, the problem was never solved. All the management was left in place to continue the abuse. And they were charged with fixing the problem, cleaning up the problem. And the people who heard or saw the dossier of 300 pages that he was talking about said, holy cow, this is a huge deal. Like, you have to go after these people. You have a huge case here. And still nothing. And Lee says 12 hours later. So this testimony that I showed you, that we just listened to 3 minutes of, and there's 2 more minutes, and it's all as explosive as all the rest. Nothing on any of the mainstream news places, CBC, CTV News, you name it, nothing, says Lee. 12 hours later, nothing on CBC, CTV apps. I mean, it's only a credible allegation of $150 million in taxpayer dollars being misappropriated, the Trudeau government trying to cover it up, and the Liberal and NDP MPs on committees trying to silence the whistleblower. Yeah, so that's scary, don't you think? Andy Lee is talking about this as well, or about more funds that are misappropriated. She says, how many companies is David Yeo of Dalian Cordex, the director of which are receiving contracts under Indigenous procurement programs? How many other consulting agencies are tied to them receiving government contracts? So far, at least 3, right? Robert Fife is reporting Ottawa didn't audit IT firms' compliance with Indigenous procurement program. So there were loopholes. People were taking advantage of loopholes, rewriting resumes to make sure that they could get it. And sometimes they themselves were owners of companies that were in the pool of companies that were getting contracts. Wild, right? Absolutely wild. Must be Indigenous. Well, I'm Indigenous enough. I identify as Indigenous. Andy Lee again, she says, wow, she straight up lied about doling out COVID-19 relief cash to her own company. This is incredible. This is from November 9th. We've seen this before. This is this lady who is, well, I'll show it. Michael Cooper here has her dead to rights, and he's like, wait a second. The receipts say you got hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then she says, well, yeah, kind of, sort of. Here we go.
Received $106,000 in so-called COVID relief payments in 2020 and another $111,000 the following year in 2021. So that is inconsistent with what you had previously stated. Your company, in which you were the CEO and are the CEO of, received almost $220,000 from SDTC, approved by the board.
Honourable Member, at the time of the board decision on those COVID payments, you recall it's March 2020. It was very difficult. We were very afraid that we were going to lose the investments that we made and the jobs.
Ms. Verschuren,
so the board
Ms. Verschuren, I just asked you to confirm that money went out the door, nearly $220,000 to your company in 2020 and 21. $220,000, correct?
The board sought legal advice on how best to proceed during the COVID payments.
And you moved the motion to funnel that money out the door, didn't you?
Because funding went to existing portfolio companies where conflicts were previously declared, so they were declared, and because no company received preferential treatment, the legal opinion
no money received preferential treatment. Your company received preferential treatment in the sense that you sat on the board and provided money to it that the RGCT report flagged as likely not complying with the contribution agreement.
The legal opinion
from who?
Was then received
from an insider. And he's like, oh yeah, that one, right? So the whole idea, she didn't tell the truth about the $220,000. When she was caught red-handed, she said, no, there was oversight. It was already approved. Nobody got preferential treatment, but they did get preferential treatment because she, as the CEO of the company, also sat on the board and moved motions to move money to her company. So she got preferential treatment. So there's lots wrong with how they view what they did. That person stepped down, right? That person resigned. And the person above that person as well stepped down because of the misappropriation of funds, et cetera, presumably, right? So Michael Barrett, again, this is from yesterday at almost 8 p.m. Breaking news, government official reveals there's no action plan to recoup taxpayer money from Trudeau's billion-dollar green slush fund, following revelations that board members funneled millions to companies they own. After 8 years of Trudeau, this is how your dollar is treated. So not only did they first lie about it when they were caught, now, when we're caught and we're at the part where we're going to say, how are we going to be made whole? How is the Canadian taxpayer going to be made whole from this money that went out the door that didn't really do anything that you said it was going to do? We're real sorry. That's it. We're not going to have any kind of, consequences for doing that. Nobody, I mean, are they even going to lose their board memberships? Are they going to even lose their positions on these boards? Doubtful. Here's another example of this kind of waste. Holly Doan is reporting failed vaccine factory in Minister Decluse's riding received $323 million, double the subsidies originally claimed. I'm not able to discuss further details, CEO of Medicago tells Commons Committee. So shucks, right? Like he can't discuss further details because, that would incriminate him. Is he pleading the fifth? Is that what's going on here? I can't say anything more for fear of being arrested. Holly Doan says Senate Human Rights Committee cites Human Rights Commission as incompetent. Quote, witnesses describe a toxic culture at the commission. So we're stepping all over ourselves. All of the people, all of the politicians from mayors, city councilors to premiers and prime ministers, we're putting out statements about UN's human rights and the importance of human rights, et cetera, et cetera. These guys are the Human Rights Commission. They're going to try and use human rights and somebody's potential to be offended to censor the internet. That's what they're going for. And these people, looking at the makeup of these people, it's not exactly diverse, right? But these people are the ones who are toxic. These people are the ones who are the bullies. These people are the ones who silence people that they don't agree with and don't give full hearing, a full viewing to the other people's ideas, right? It is their way or the highway, and that's it. And it's one of those things where when you stack it up with all the rest of the liberal corruption, we could get rid of a lot of bureaucratic waste in our governments. A lot. Here is the carbon tax stuff. And so, with the fraud, do we think that we're going to have any kind of accountability at this point in time? If I remember, Mike Harris came in, people hated Mike Harris in Ontario. And then Ernie Eves took over. And Dalton McGuinty was saying Ernie Eves is terrible, and we can definitely run healthcare. This is me trying to remember politics from 20 years ago. Okay, so this was like 2002, 2003. We can do healthcare in Ontario with the money we have. We don't need to do taxes. Dalton McGuinty signed a no new tax pledge. Okay, and Dalton McGuinty won. And the second he won, he said, "Holy cow, the finances are way worse than we thought they were because they are liars." And actually, remember about that no new taxes thing? Haha, I lied. And he brought in a health subsidy, which was a health levy, which is the same as a tax. It's if you look on Google for other words for taxes, levy is one of the first words, right? So he didn't bring in a new tax, he brought in a levy. And I was very disillusioned. I was like, are you kidding me? There was a whole ceremony where you signed a no tax pledge and you brought in a new tax. So what I'm saying is people believed that Dalton McGuinty had found malfeasance in the books of Ernie Eves and believed him that we needed to pay more taxes, and nobody was even questioned as far as I remember that. There was kind of a, ceremonial slap on the wrist. Like, the reason we're in financial dire straits is that guy's fault. Not my fault, that guy's fault. And this is what's going to happen with Poilievre. If he walks in, he's going to say, Trudeau's policies did this and Trudeau's a bad guy, but, nothing is going to, no criminal charges, no accountability, no OJ style trial. Even if we had an OJ style trial, at the end of it, Mr. Rouleau would walk out and say, he's innocent. That's it. I'm sorry. He's just innocent. This was already preordained. We just went through this whole rigmarole to, make you poor people happy, basically. I include myself in the poor people that he's placating there, right? And so even if we get a trial, it wouldn't be honest. He would get off. Trudeau would get off. Freeland would get off. Gould would get off. They would all, Mendocino would walk away scot-free. Nobody would think he was a liar. It's all just going to be water under the bridge. And that's very frustrating from the perspective of these people are liars. I understand that they're not going to be held accountable at all, period. I'd love to be wrong, but I feel like I'm not. Anyway, the cow farts from unbelievable climate action. Western Standard is reporting Stephen Galbeau moves to cap methane emissions from cows. For a complete story, click on the photo. And I thought, okay, hold on. There's got to be other people reporting this. Danielle Smith says, incredibly, this is actually real. Yes. How is going after ranchers and dairy farmers a priority for this federal government? Completely ridiculous. So Bloomberg is reporting Canada tackles methane emissions from cow burps with credit plan. And the cow's got a question like, Roo? The cow is very, very, very curious about how this whole thing is going to work. Global News is reporting, can making cows burp less make a dent on climate change? No, please stop. Please stop. This is like explaining something. If you were a teacher in grade 3 and the kid came up to you and said that, you would say, no, and you don't need to worry about climate change that much. It's not that. No, please don't worry about it. You should be more worried about POGs or whatever the thing for grade 3 is now. But you would have a lot of sympathy for that child, and you would say, no, please don't do this. But the news is putting this crap out there, right? And they need to stop. The federal government needs to stop too. The news continues. The federal government thinks so too. No, making cows burp less will not impact climate change whatsoever. Not even a tiny little bit. Bob Zimmer, who is a conservative MP, I checked yesterday, said, I just requested an emergency debate on repealing the carbon tax on all Canadians in support of the Northwest Territories Premier R.J. Simpson, who is calling on the Prime Minister to axe the tax. Here's 38 seconds of that. I don't think we're going to get any kind of debate. I don't think we're going to get any kind of emergency debate or anything like that. This carbon tax is central to Trudeau's plan, and it's central to SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, all of the rest of it. This carbon tax, as long as Trudeau is in power, and if Poilievre repeals the whole thing, I'll be shocked. But as long as Trudeau's in power, the carbon tax is going to remain. Here is Conservative MP Zimmer.
Everybody, in a devastating blow to Justin Trudeau's carbon tax, recently elected as of Thursday, Northwest Territories Premier called on Ottawa to grant a complete exemption to the Northwest Territories for the carbon tax. Many of you know that Northwest Territories has some of the coldest temperatures in Canada and really has a devastating effect on residents that are just trying to stay warm or feed their families. So I am requesting an emergency debate to repeal the carbon tax on all Canadians. We'll see what the speaker says. Keep you posted.
He's going to say no. So, I mean, be prepared, Bob. But it's good that people are fighting. It's good that people are putting this up all the time, right? I don't think we're fighting from a fair position. I don't think we're playing a fair game. One group is playing by one set of rules, and the Liberals are playing by a completely different set of rules. And I don't think that most Canadians acknowledge that or understand that. Here's Chris, and he says, we finally, just to explain what I mean, the Liberals can paint you as misogynistic or whatever for doing anything that they deem outside of okay. They can do exactly the same thing, but to the right, the political right, and it is deemed just fine. There's no problem with it. They play by a different set of rules. They will smear you, and they will lie about you, and they will censor you. Alex Jones was going through this the other day, like talking about the tactics used. They will do that successfully because they have influence in the media. They have influence in all sorts of different circles of influence. And so because they have that influence, they're able to action that kind of plan. X being what X is right now, says Alex Jones, is kind of putting a fly in their ointment. But fundamentally, they're able to smear with impunity. And if you are telling the truth, say about corruption in Sustainable Development Canada, Technology Canada, you won't get anywhere, even if you've got them dead to rights, even if you've got exactly everything you need to prove all of your allegations. You won't get anywhere, and they will be able to smear you as a climate denier. right? And that's the difference. That's the different set of rules we're playing with. We have to prove that what they're doing is wrong, and we have to have the evidence, and like the right is coming at it like a court of law, where the left is coming at it like a high school clique. There you go. That's the difference. Okay, moving on. Not really, but kind of. Chris says, we finally have the documents. Ever wonder how much it costs the government to administer the carbon tax? I wondered the same thing, so I forced the government to release the information. Everyone knew we were paying more for gas, heating, and groceries because of the carbon tax, but now we know that we're paying $82.6 million for 465 full-time employees just to fund carbon tax bureaucrats. Time to end the farce and end the carbon tax so Canadians can afford to eat, heat, and house themselves. So there's a lot wrong with spending that kind of money to redistribute wealth. And there's a lot wrong with taxing the air, which is what carbon tax is. Carbon is less than 1% of the atmosphere, 1% of the makeup of the oxygen, et cetera, or like what we live in, right? Like the air ocean thing we live in, I guess. And because of that, they're taxing the air, and we're fine with that. I mean, people aren't fine with that, but we are not effectively fighting against it. Here's Pierre Poilievre, and he's responding to this piece of news. Tories have successfully blamed affordability crisis on carbon price, Trudeau says. So Trudeau is tanking in the polls, and he's saying the Conservatives have been successful at branding the carbon tax as the reason for all of these price increases, etc. And Poilievre says, Trudeau tells his favorite news outlet, CP, that common sense Conservatives are to blame for the hate of his carbon tax. No, it's hated because it drives up the cost of everything to achieve nothing. He's not worth the cost after 8 years. So that's another branding thing. So that's interesting. Is he correct? Maybe. But just like Daniel Smith plays the carbon game, so does Pierre Poilievre. And Poilievre says, well, here's the tweet that Bernier is responding to. After 8 years of Trudeau, says Poilievre, we learned Canada has now dropped to 62 out of 67th countries on climate performance, proving his carbon tax doesn't work. Common sense Conservatives will use technology, not taxes, to protect our environment. Weird. I don't like that at all, right? Bernier says, who cares where we stand on climate performance? The climate is just fine. You believe in that climate hoax and support the Paris Accord just like Trudeau, but you want to perform better than him. You will tax us to subsidize your green technology programs and bow to the climate alarmist mob. Nothing will change. Yeah, and that's a very concerning prospect. But I just don't like seeing our politicians who keep talking about freedom and sovereignty and, cutting the rot, et cetera, playing the carbon game. Because playing the carbon game, even though the public largely believes that CO2 is a problem and we need to reduce emissions and all of the rest of it, regardless of all of that, it doesn't make sense at all when you dig into the data. You have to, and so having politicians who are playing the carbon game harms us, because we need to actually live in reality rather than playing for political points. And I don't know how you do that effectively, because a lot of people will dismiss if you say, carbon, CO2 pricing, carbon taxes, all the rest of it's bunk, nonsense. And I mean, Trump won. Trump was able to ignore climate change and win an election and not have to address climate change through his tenure, I suppose. And they removed climate change from the White House webpage, et cetera, and people were upset with that. So, I mean, it's possible to just walk in and not talk about it, but Poilievre isn't making that move. He's talking about it, and he's signaling that he's going to keep moving with the SDGs in that direction. So that's interesting to me as well. Here's Dan McTeague, gas price wizard, and he says, Quebec's hydro dams emit more methane than all the cattle in North America, and yet we have a climate activist, now Trudeau's green Jesus Minister of Environment, fresh off imposing 3 carbon taxes on Canadians tackling cow farts. Canada has fallen. So yeah, the cow farts people are upset about this. I've been talking about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. It's very anti-Mark. When you say that's very Islamophobic, you are now no longer talking about the criticism of maybe that Islamic person or that Muslim person you were talking about. Now you're talking about how racist you are for bringing it up, right? If you bring up something and somebody says that's very anti-Semitic of you, right? It's the same thing. And they're trying to do the same thing with climate change denier. And I think it's interesting because they do a couple of things through this kind of language, and people are noticing that, and that's notable. So here we go.
What do you make of this phrase, climate change denier? Where does it come from, and what's been the impact of that phrase?
The phrase comes from climate activists wanting to frame their opponents as Holocaust deniers. And so they chose that word deliberately in order to shut down debate. It's a sort of a debate-ending frame aimed at just gaining power over the entire discourse, which has been incredibly successful. It's why when people think of climate change, they think of the end of the world rather than thinking of it as a manageable risk, or one that we're doing a very good job of mitigating already, because carbon emissions have been going down in Britain, the United States, most of Europe.
Still playing the carbon game, blah, blah, blah. You know what's weird? Okay, do a lot of people deny the Holodomor? Right? When he says, Holocaust denial, the Holodomor is largely seen as a Holocaust, right? Right? I think people have referred to it as a Holocaust, the other Holocaust, Holodomor. 29 million people died in the Holodomor. I'm probably saying it wrong, but are there a lot of people who go around saying, that Holodomor thing didn't happen, right? I don't think that's a thing. So it's super weird. And if it is a thing, like I don't think anybody's upset about it, right? And so the funny part about all this to me, the whole Holocaust denial, how that's been turned into a negative thing, and you're not allowed to talk about it, and you're not allowed to investigate it. If you bring facts to that argument, people aren't interested in hearing that as well. So that's interesting too. It's just interesting to me, the whole thing, the positioning of the smear itself, using denialism as a smear, and everybody knows what you're talking about. But then if you dig into it to have a discussion about the particulars, don't. People will just get upset. Okay, Tom says Ford has cut planned 2024 production of electric F-150 Lightnings in half, proving once again that EVs are a toy for the rich who want a virtue signal. EVs are expensive and unreliable. Ford will cancel all EVs, unsustainable business model. I think that's true, and I think it's funny, except that also we invested heavily in battery plants. So it's like it's like getting a hot stock tip, right? And then you invest all your money in the hot stock tip, battery plants. And then all of a sudden you start to notice cracks in this investment. But unlike the stocks, you can't just pull your money out and liquidate right now. It looks like we're going to have to just stay and ride this stock all the way to the bottom, because the 13 billion is going to turn into worthless. I think it's going to be pretty worthless. I think when the chickens come home to roost on the battery plant thing, I think the Canadian taxpayer is going to be the biggest loser. And that's not great. John says COP28 is on the verge of failure because of petrostates. It's on the verge of failure because in most countries, adopting the kind of policies Labor and the Greens want is political suicide. And we're seeing that pan out in Trudeau's approval ratings, et cetera, et cetera. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful